Howdy, and welcome to the Aggie Teach Momentum podcast, brought to you by the Aggie Teach Arts and Sciences program at Texas A&M University. I am your host, Kenrick Davies, former high school physics and astronomy teacher and current program manager for Aggie Teach Arts and Sciences. This podcast is meant to provide a little more insight and information to those seeking a secondary content teacher certification in Texas. We aim to provide episodes that help pre-service educators on the path to certification, as well as leverage the experience of myself and other guest speakers to support teachers in the first few years in the classroom. In this episode, we have it's a big topic and one that our listeners may find a little troubling at times, but it's going to be around school safety. And we have a guest in the studio today. We have Deputy Nathan Dennis, who's the Public Information Officer for the Brazos County Sheriff's Office. Welcome to the studio.
Howdy. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Well, yeah, we appreciate you taking time out of I know your busy schedule to be able to come out and be a part of our podcast. I know the teachers who are going to be listening are going to be really, I think, appreciative of the information that you have to bring. So let's get into it. Let's talk about you. Tell us who you are and how you ended up with the Brazos County Sheriff's Office.
Absolutely. So I'm working on my 20th year at the Sheriff's Office, and during that time, I've had the opportunity to do a little bit of everything within our agency. Started out as a detention officer in our jail, and then went to the police academy, and then from there I worked on our mental health team, checking on individuals with mental illness, and then transferred to patrol, where I spent the bulk of my career, and then some time in investigations. And now I'm here as the Public Information Deputy and Community Outreach Deputy for the Sheriff's Office, and I absolutely love it.
Sounds like you've been around the block.
Yeah, with that comes experience.
That is true, yes. You'd be able to offer a wealth of information to any facet of stories or anything that's happening within the county. So I can see why you fell into this role. So the reason why we have the Brazos County Sheriff's Office in the studio is because for one of our local school districts, College Station ISD, the Brazos County Sheriff's Office heads up the School Resource Officer Program, the SROs that you might find on your campus. So this is probably one of the most visible representations of what a district or campus does for school safety. Can you talk about what a school resource officer is? What are the roles and responsibilities?
So school resource deputies are essentially still Texas peace officers, and so they receive the same certification and went through the police academy just like all of our other sworn personnel. It's just that they receive specialized training in different fields and have some added certifications that would assist them in their assignments.
Awesome. So what exactly do they do on campus? Like, do you have any information about what their daily sort of routine is?
Absolutely. So the school resource deputies are the first line of defense. We want to make sure that there's a presence and that everybody understands and knows that there is a police officer on campus, because a lot of times that will aid in crime prevention is just a police presence and knowing that there's somebody there. And so that would be the first thing. And then second is building relationships with the staff and the students and the mentoring and things like that, and getting to know the ins and outs of the campuses that they are assigned to, and try to build those relationships and, prevention of something happening, or if there is something out of the ordinary, that somebody feels comfortable coming to a deputy and letting them know about something that they saw.
Yeah, I was thinking about, as you were answering, the two campuses that I taught at, I had a pretty good relationship with both of the SROs on those campuses, and I saw the relationship that they built up with the students and the staff and the teachers on campus. And just like you said, if they don't feel comfortable going to the police officer that's on campus, then there's going to be a lot of things that are missed that shouldn't be. So I'm glad you brought that up. Now, one of the things that I mentioned earlier is that Brazos County is who covers the SROs for some of College Station ISD, but that's not always the case, right? I mean, depending on the school district, what other entities might be overseeing the SRO program?
So with recent legislation, there are now certified law enforcement or a armed security officer on every campus here in the state of Texas. Here locally, both Bryan and College Station, we have police officers that are assigned to campuses that are from middle school and high schools. And so, some of the elementary and intermediate schools, they contract out through security companies, but they're still have individuals that have certifications and certain requirements that are met, but there is a armed individual on a campus as a line of protection.
Yeah, so I think in both of the campuses that I had, it was just the city PD. It was the city police department that handled that particular program. So it's, I guess, for our listeners, right, no matter where you go, you're always going to have someone on campus, right? It's just a matter of who they're associated with, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. So, again, one of the things that our podcast, I think, is sort of geared to is that new teacher, right? If it's a pre-service teacher who is now thinking about what they're going to be doing in their first year, or maybe an early career teacher, I know one of the things that I see constantly are questions around how do I handle disruptive students? What happens if a fight breaks out in my classroom? And I know as a seasoned teacher that's few and far between that it happens, actually, especially in the classroom. So coming from someone who's in law enforcement, what sort of statistics can you offer to back that up?
So that is the fear that, every day is almost chaotic, and fights and things and breaking out in some the classrooms. And, that's the fear of everybody. And, it doesn't change also in the law enforcement world. One of the things that I thought was that these fights and things would be a common occurrence, but getting a chance to sit down and really learn the life of a school resource deputy, I realized that these fights are few and far between,
right,
and they're not occurring during lectures and actual teaching. It's just like where you see out in the streets and out in the community is things do still happen.
Right.
Disagreements happen and things like that, and disruptions, but it occurs in the common areas and things like that. It's not breaking out in the middle of a classroom and then we have a classroom full of students fighting or something like
right.
that.
So like cafeterias, gyms,
absolutely,
just on the school
hallways,
grounds. Yeah, I can say from my experience, it's absolutely, like, it's never happened in my classroom. Were there times in which there were elevated voices and students yelling at each other? Yeah, could be. But I think generally the students don't want something like that happening in the classroom. They would rather take care of it somewhere else, so to speak. But it happens, but not as frequently as what maybe the media portrays or what the fear is. And I like how you put it. I mean, thinking about your own daily life, right? You go about your life, and fights aren't just happening on every corner, right, or every store that you're in, or every place you go during the day. It's very infrequent that you actually see something like that, or you even hear about it.
Yeah, and I think that it's carries over to the education side as well, and things that happen at school. There are those times where you're going to have disagreements and elevated voices and things like that, but a lot of the times that those incidents are de-escalated,
right,
through the skills of the staff of educators, and then it called for an actual school resource deputy to be involved. But there's a lot of times that those are just de-escalated, and then the incident is just prevented.
Right. So let's talk about an actual incident, though. We don't want to shy away from it. It could happen, right? I have never, actually, in my 13 years of being a teacher, I never once was in the middle of a fight. So, take that. But what happens if there is a fight? Like, you are on cafeteria duty and there happens to be two students that start an all-out brawl. What should the teacher be doing in that situation?
I think it kind of goes back to you have to prioritize things. You got to make sure that you're safe and the other students and staff around the situation are safe. And so you're going to need to do things that only make your situation safer and better. And so that may be moving everybody to the other side of the room or the other side of the cafeteria, evacuating or getting folks to leave the said space, and then whenever it's safe to do so. If it's still escalating and you need to call for more resources, such as the deputy that might be on campus or other additional staff, it's very fluid, and we want to make sure that you just continue to make your situation better and that you try to be aware of your surroundings and be as safe as possible.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I can say that there's only maybe a handful of people on campus that are actually like trained to handle a situation like that, or trained to put hands on a student in a way that will break up a fight. So if you're not one of those people, you don't do that, right? You just worry about the rest of the situation.
And that's a common misconception, is that with law enforcement being on campus, our role is for the safety and to investigate criminal acts.
Okay.
And so when those fights and things like that occur, of course, depending on the severity and anything that was involved, but a lot of times those are handled by the school staff.
Mm-hmm.
And so the deputy still may intervene and help if whenever it's needed, but the deputies and these full out fights and things like that are just not very common.
Right. Yeah, and my experience speaks to that as well. So in a situation where we have teachers on campus and they're learning about school safety, what sort of general topics would a teacher want to get trained on in order to feel comfortable being in the school building?
So the biggest thing is just knowing your surroundings and paying attention. As technology evolves, we use more and more of that, and it wraps up our attention. And so one of the basic things that we can do is taking that second to look at your surroundings in a certain classroom or room that you might be in, and knowing what exits and potential exits are available to you, or just running through your head, what would I do if something was to occur now? That just helps prepare our mind to work through the different phases that if there was an actual event that you could get through. And then I would say that continuing your education, as far as there's several programs out there that can be utilized, such as Stop the Bleed or some kind of medical component. And then there's programs such as our civilian response to active shooter events, and some self-defense classes, some of those things. Because even though that these fights and things like that are very uncommon, you never know when you might have to physically defend yourself in something.
Sure.
And so having all those tools available in your toolbox is only going to benefit you.
Yeah, so I can speak a little bit from the teacher side of what sort of trainings I went through as a teacher. And of course, listeners need to take this whole discussion with a grain of salt a little bit about how their specific districts are going to have their own policies and their own way of handling certain situations. So I guess the first training that a teacher needs to be aware of is, what are the district policies, right? What are the things that they're going to be expecting you to do? But you mentioned Stop the Bleed. So for those who are unfamiliar, Stop the Bleed is essentially how to handle wounds, right? Gunshot wounds or stab wounds or things like that. So it's medical training in that respect. I went through that in one of the last few years that I was in education. It was put on by the school nurse, so it was really more on the medical side of things rather than maybe school safety, how to do a tourniquet, that sort of thing. I remember our nurse always doing CPR classes, so being CPR certified is maybe a good way to go. But the active shooter trainings, you mentioned those active shooter trainings, how to handle situations when you're in different parts of the building, because your classroom may have a certain way of thinking, but if you're in the auditorium, that is going to change the whole way of looking at a situation. So there's different versions of that I think different school districts will put in. But yeah, bottom line is that thinking about what you're going to do in those situations is already putting your step ahead of a lot of other teachers maybe.
And a lot of this goes hand in hand with everything that we do on our daily basis. One thing that I found interesting is that you can't just prepare for if something happens in this one room, because everything's so fluid. And these classes and these trainings and things, they focus on principles. There used to be run, hide, fight. We've kind of changed gears a little bit, and so now we're teaching the principles of avoiding. So we want you to avoid the suspect or the danger if at all possible. And then the next phase of that is deny. So we want you to constantly be working on denying access from the suspect or someone that's trying to do something bad to you or others. And then the third kind of step is defend. And we just want to remind folks that this is something that you need to to do some soul searching and see what you're capable with and willing to do, and what your physical abilities are if you had to defend yourself or
Right.
others. The biggest point that can be made with when seeking these trainings is to remember and to know your actual policies and procedures of your ISD.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's going to be a big deal here, is that we can talk about generalities and I can talk about my experience, but you're going to be in a district. They're going to have policies. They're going to have rules about how they're training you and all of that. I can speak a little bit about that sort of evolution. My first campus that I was a teacher on, their training, their policy was hide, right? I mean, if something happens, you hid in your room. And may not have been that bad for me. I had an interior classroom, 2 big old metal doors. I didn't have any windows, so I mean, we could probably barricade that pretty easily. But in the second classroom that I was in, the training had morphed to, if you can run, right? If you know it's happening somewhere else in the school, then you get out. So it's interesting how things have changed over the course of the years. So again, if you're listening, you just want to make sure what does your training say? And thinking about it from your classroom. Are you near an exit? Can you run? You know, that's something that you'll have to kind of think about in your own situation. So kind of taking a little bit of a step back from that, just thinking about general things. What are 2 or 3 things that a teacher can do in the classroom to help promote just overall safety?
So I think one of the key things would be to keep doors locked whenever possible. And it's just as simple as that. You want to keep the safety of the classroom or whatever room that you're in. So one of the best things that we can do is simply just keeping doors locked whenever possible. And I know that some schools have policies as far as the door will be locked during instruction time and things like that. So again, policy and procedure kind of is woven into everything. Right. But then the second biggest thing is knowing the classroom that you're in, knowing the potential exits, windows, what things are available, that if you did have to defend yourself or your students or something like that, what tools are in the classroom that could be utilized to make your situation better. And so being aware of your surroundings, I know that I've already mentioned that, but that is such a important topic, is because it just helps our brain get through that process of denial and work on making our situation better so that you can survive if there was something. But
yeah, that locking the doors is certainly one of the biggest rules that we were always kind of drilled into our heads, is that if you are in the classroom, doors shut, doors locked, right? And even if a student has to go out for the restroom, doors shut, doors locked. During passing periods, it's a little bit different story because they expect you to be at the door and greeting students on the way in. So a little bit of a give and take there. But it's once that's over, doors shut, doors locked. And that goes for exterior doors as well, right? I mean, I know that is something that I know SROs sort of have a responsibility for, or maybe it was just the ones that I observed, of making sure to kind of tour the building and checking the doors, making sure they're locked and nothing's coming in. So that's, I think, one of the easiest ways for prevention.
And it's so important too. I mean, these locks are there for a reason,
right?
And if we're just not engaging them, then what's the point? So
right, yeah. So okay, if listeners want to find out more about how to promote school safety as a teacher, where can they find any resources, maybe online or through their local area?
So there is a website for Texas School Safety Center that's going to have a lot of good information. And then we've kind of already hit on it a little bit with Stop the Bleed, or some kind of medical program or training. It could be so beneficial to both your professional life, but also just when you're at home and things like that, having the basic medical knowledge to be able to apply a tourniquet. You never know when that's going to be needed at a car accident or a simple cut or something like that. Right. So those kind of courses, medical, are super important. And then anything that you can do that far as like a self-defense classes or something like that, and you not only learn techniques and things that could help keep you safe, but it also builds the confidence.
Right.
And that's super important in these situations. And then as I realized as a police officer is I got into dangerous situations out on the street and things, and then your training kicked in. I would draw my gun, and I never thought about it. It was just because it was drilled into me of how, all the different training. And so many tools that you could put in your toolbox will be important.
Yeah, I'll echo that confidence. I mean, that's the whole point of drills, right? I mean, of the drills that we do in school. And of course, we, as teachers, we have another drill today, because we have things to do in the classroom, right? But if you don't practice the drill, if the students don't practice the drill, then it's possible they're not going to know what to do when something happens, right? So yeah, I mean, I'd echo confidence is key.
I remember too all the drills and things like that. Never really taking anything too serious in the moment, but realizing and getting and experiencing some bad situations have made me realize how important it is to take those drills with seriousness and getting the students to buy into that. Because if you're only putting half of your motivation into it, or you're only doing it halfway, your students are going to do the same.
That's true.
And so you don't want that on your conscience as well. We want to always try to be that person that these folks, as they're growing up and becoming adults, that person that they can look to. And so simple things is, like that, even though it may seem redundant, and it's just, you never know how important that can be.
Yeah, I totally agree. And that is all the time we have for today. Thank you, Deputy Dennis, for being a guest today. The Aggie Teach Momentum podcast drops every 2 weeks, so make sure that you are looking for the next episode on Spotify or linked on the Aggie Teach Arts and Sciences website. For more information, you can visit our program website at aggieteachartsci.tamu.edu. That is aggieteach, ARTSCI.tamu.edu. Thanks and gig 'em.